Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the How to Get Jacked series. If you are looking to get jacked, you are in the right place. Now, this is the third episode, and in this episode, we're going to be talking about training intensity or hard training, okay? In the first one, we talked about exercise selection, so what is the right exercise for you? And in the second video, we talked about form and technique, so how to perfect your form, okay? So as I said, in this one, we're going to talk about hard training or training intensity. Now, I'm sure there's different opinions out there of what hard training looks like, but I'm here to tell you today, it's not how long you train for, it's not how many times you train a week, it's not about how sweaty you are or how hard the training feels, okay? It's actually how close are you taking your sets to failure. Now this, as always, applies to muscle growth, okay? So I'm not speaking for someone who's a hybrid athlete or a strength training. We're specifically talking about muscle growth, okay? When it comes to muscle growth, training intensity refers to how close you are taking your sets to failure. Now, why is this so important? They've shown a lot in research that the closer you take your set to failure, the more muscle growth you will likely see, okay? Now this is especially the case for when you get to 3 reps or less shy of failure. Pre that, you can still grow muscle, but there seems to be a significant drop off. Okay, when you go past sort of 3 to 4 reps shy of failure, there seems to be a bit of a drop off when we talk about muscle growth, and you kind of have to say that those sets aren't very effective for when it comes to muscle growth, and taking them a little bit closer to failure would make them a whole lot more effective. Now, it's not to say that they're not effective at all, but they could be a lot more effective if we just took them a couple more reps closer to failure. Okay, now, obviously we talked about how close we should be going to. Now there's a little bit of nuance when it comes to that. So the general recommendation is majority of your training should come from 2 to sort of 1 IRR, okay? So we should be 2 reps shy of failure or around 1 rep shy of failure. So within that sort of ballpark. Now there is a bit of more nuanced conversation when it comes to compound and isolation exercises and high rep exercises. So for compounds, I generally recommend, and there may be people out there with different opinions when it comes to their recommendations for, like, say, compound and isolation exercises. But generally for compound exercises, I feel like 3 reps shy of failure to 1 rep shy of failure should be majority of where your training should be coming from when we're talking about compound exercises. So compound exercises are multi-joint movements. So things like squats, things like deadlifts, things like barbell bench press, most of our horizontal and vertical pulls are all sort of compound exercises. When we're talking about isolation exercises, majority of your training should be within 2 reps in reserve or 2 failure. Main reason for this being is we're generally training at higher reps, so it is tougher to gauge how far you are from failure, okay? So you would generally know this, and a really good example is sort of lateral raises, okay? So when you're doing lateral raises, especially when you're higher reps, you'll probably feel the burn pretty early on, but you'll find that you have the ability to grind a lot further and get a lot more reps out. So you might get the burn 7 reps shy of failure, and you're able to grind all those reps out. So that is generally why I encourage people to go a little bit closer to failure, or even take it to failure when it comes to isolation exercises, because it's a little bit harder to gauge how close you are. And plus, it's just a way less fatiguing. So when you think about a compound exercise, so say if you're thinking about a barbell back squat, if you were to take a barbell back squat to failure as opposed to lateral raises to failure, we definitely don't need a study to tell us how much more fatiguing it is going to be to take a barbell back squat to failure, okay? So, and ultimately that is the conversation that we're having around why we shouldn't be taking things to failure. And I sort of talk about this a little bit later in the episode, as you can see down the bottom there, why we shouldn't take things to failure. And the main reason being for that is just the trade-off of how much fatigue we accumulate going closer to failure as opposed to the extra stimulus that we get. And when we find with compound exercises, because they're generally a heavier weight, the recruitment of muscle fibers is a lot higher. So we recruit a lot more muscle fibers when we're in that heavier weight. And so therefore we are getting a lot of tension to a broad range of muscle fibers, almost pretty much all muscle fibers, when we're doing compound movements, just because of the demand on the target muscle to be able to lift. Okay, so, and that is one of the main reasons why we want to go close to failure, is that we recruit more muscle fibers, so therefore more muscle fibers get exposed to tension, so therefore you're more likely to grow all of those muscle fibers. Okay, so when it comes to compound exercises, you'll generally see a lot more recruitment of muscle fibers. Isolation, less so, because you got lighter weight. So it is going to take you a little bit longer to be able to recruit more muscle fibers. You need to take the training closer to failure, so your body has to recruit more muscle fibers. And again, more muscle fibers get exposed to tension, more likely you are to be able to grow those muscle fibers. Okay. Training close to failure is a bit of a skill. Okay. Now, this is something that I've definitely noticed over the last couple of years, since really starting to take my training a lot more seriously. Obviously, coming out of sort of being a professional athlete where everything was geared around strength, geared around power, also like endurance and stuff as well. Wasn't really too geared towards muscle growth. So making that transition into being a physique athlete, definitely have noticed the difference with my ability to be able to train closer to failure. Also, like, since learning how important training close to failure is, and like really putting a big emphasis on it, I've definitely noticed that I've improved my ability to train closer to failure, whether that be judging how close I am. Now, this is something that a lot of people struggle with. If I was to say to you, all right, let's go to the barbell bench press, how much weight would you need to fail at 10 reps? So if you were to do 10 reps, how much weight would it take for that 10th rep to be failure? Most people wouldn't know the answer to that. And generally that comes with tracking. It also comes with experience. It also comes with the experience of training close to failure. So for me, for all the exercises in my program, I can pretty much show you 100% without even doing the exercise. I can pretty much show you 100% what the weight would be and what rep range, or sort of what rep I would target, I would fail at. The only reason I've been able to do that is just from the experience, from tracking and training close to failure. So although I say that when we're doing compound exercise, we should keep our training away from it, or at least one rep away from failure, that's not to say that we shouldn't be taking it to failure, or there's no benefit to taking it to failure, because there definitely is. We need to understand what that failure point is and what it feels like, what it looks like. All of those things are going to increase our ability to judge how far we are from failure. So say if you were to do a bench press, 90 kilos, and you're doing 10 reps, okay, and you think that's your 2 IRR, so you're 2 reps from failure doing a bench press, but then you decide, oh, I'll take this to failure, and then you get 13, 14, 15 reps. So you think that you were 2 IRR, but maybe you're more like 4, 5, 6. So you can start to see that there is benefits to taking training to failure every now and then, just to make sure that, one, we're developing the skill of training close to failure, and two, just having the ability to identify if we are actually that close to failure, and just like a tangible reference of actually taking something to failure. Can you grow above 3IR? You definitely can, especially for beginners. I would recommend staying fairly far away from failure, so 3 even to 5 IRR, so like 5 reps shy of failure for beginners, as I feel like people will get more benefit from improving technique, plus they're a beginner, so they haven't really been exposed to any weight training as previously, so we know that beginners grow quite easily just because it's such a novel stimulus for them. As you get into intermediate, I definitely think that you should introduce more failure training, so you understand what failure feels like, and you start to again get that experience, have a tangible reference point for exactly where failure is, and then as you get closer, or as you become more advanced, I think majority of that training should be around that 0 to 2. 1, because you just completely understand, and 2, I feel like you get a lot more confidence as you train close to failure. You get a lot more confidence at training close to failure. It's less psychologically fatiguing. There's sort of like less apprehension, less sort of anxiety around going close to failure. So I feel like it's less taxing psychologically, but also you'll find that you're able to take sets reasonably hard close to failure and be able to back up for the next set. So just your capacity for work will increase over time as you become more an advanced athlete. Plus, you need to be pushing yourself pretty hard to get an adequate stimulus to make the body grow muscle as you've been training for such a long time. So you really need to be continuously pushing it, but obviously understanding that recovery is an important process. And if you need to be taking deload weeks or sort of half recovery weeks or whatever you want to call it to sort of freshen yourself up, that's something that you should be aware of as well as an advanced athlete. Okay, so but for beginners, don't really think that there's much to gain from taking your training close to failure, mostly because beginners don't have the best technique as it is, and they don't really need to, because just looking at weight is going to be able to grow muscle for beginners. As we know, newbie gains, and then intermediates should definitely start to drip feed it in and taking their training close to failure, if not to failure. So I've kind of answered the last question there of should you always train to failure. Kind of already answered it. I think it's highly fatiguing. I definitely think that there's periods where you should. I think for isolation exercises, especially higher rep isolation exercises, things like lateral raises, even sort of like bicep curls as well, ab training, calf training, triceps can be a little bit more fatiguing depending on what you're doing. Say like a cable tricep push down, you can easily take that close to failure. Just things where it's not overall fatiguing, like where you're recruiting a lot of muscle fibers. As I said, there's a massive difference between taking a barbell back squat to failure and taking a lateral raise to failure when you compare the fatigue. So just making sure that you're not driving yourself into ground by taking compound exercises all the way to failure all the time, and then you're just finding yourself so fatigued all the time that you can't improve, you can't progress, you can't increase your weight, all of those things. You don't look forward to going to the gym. All of these things need to be taken into account. But then again, this is my opinion. A lot of people will have different responses to taking training to failure. Some people will love it, and maybe that'll increase their adherence to the gym, and they enjoy taking training to failure, so therefore they want to do it. Maybe like holding themselves back, they don't enjoy. So all of these things need to be taken into account, and at the end of the day, you will still get a stimulus for muscle growth. You just need to be making sure that you're managing fatigue along the way. So hope this has helped, guys. Thank you for hanging around. Obviously do all those good things, share, like, subscribe, those things that you do on YouTube. Really appreciate you guys watching these. They've been pretty successful, obviously not crazy not crazy, but it's cool to think that some people are hanging in there through these whole videos, and potentially that it's educating some people, so that's really cool. So yeah, look forward to speaking to you in the next one. See you guys.